himself only showed it once or twice, but other builders showed. I mean, you might have showed us.
It should be streaming
Not
now.
as
I'm just gonna make sure that door downstairs.
It's gotta be a pain in the butt too, because, I have two younger children, so you constantly trying to get the house picked up before you show it. Yeah, we never.
Okay, Joe, how you doing?
Hello, how are you?
Yeah,
Good.
we haven't got an offer. We just listed on Zillow, and but not until like September timeframe. And we had 2 or 3 people immediately take a look at it. They all seemed interested, but you did get a bite. Then we took it off because we didn't want to have the hassle of showing it during the wintertime. We'll put it back on by ourselves. Show it through the summer. If we don't get any bites by the end of the summer, we'll probably list it.
I mean, I showed.
I wish we
one
could have
person,
done a playground downtown. I think that would
Yeah,
have been a
before we listed it,
phenomenal.
and he came over and he really liked it.
You know, a
But
safe,
you can tell that it's
fenced-in
just they knew, I think they
for people
drive by
to,
and
while
look
they're
at it, and they
eating,
said, well, let's walk
go to
through it.
CEO, while
And they
they
realize
while they
that they
live
can't
downtown, while they go to businesses,
lowball
between
because they're not gonna be
appointments.
able to.
I think that would have been amazing.
They're a lowball, it's like, okay, the house is what it is, take it or leave it. And I'd be willing to listen to an offer, but the other thing is, it's by 6 points
Yes.
by a realtor, it's like, that's a lot to the value of the house.
Yes, it does.
So that's one of the things we showed. We'll see how it goes.
Thanks, Ethan.
Not in any particular hurry.
Yeah, we my wife doesn't think that still has another year and a half left to work, so we don't have any immediate. So yeah. Our more motivating factor is we want to buy a place like Florida. We'd like to not have a mortgage, and we'd like to use the proceeds of the sale to do it, but
You know, we're in Florida.
Vero Beach.
This is during the.
In fact, we've got a community in Vero Beach picked out.
That's good. My girlfriend used to teach down in Vero Beach 3-4 years ago.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Yep, and then she moved to Jersey, and then she moved up here.
Renee, I think, gave me her name.
Jackie Riley.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, as a person to call if I had any questions on Vero.
Yeah, she was there for, I think, 2 years, so she would know.
We like the area. It's a lot quieter than a lot of zooey areas in Florida. Florida generally, I can't stand it because it's too busy.
All right, so it's a couple minutes after 6, so we will get started. We'll start off with a roll call. I'm here. Levi is not. Mike?
Here.
Bob actually recently resigned from the committee.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, he's got some other stuff that he's working on right now, so we will thank him for his service. Joe?
Yeah.
Yep. Rodney?
Here, I'm gonna need to leave a little before 7. I have another meeting at the county building.
Yep, no problem. Ethan?
Yes, we do.
Kate?
Yep.
Pat said he would likely be here, but he would be late.
That's a
And-
change.
Yeah. And Mary Ann.
We're not voting on anything else.
All right. As far as comments from the chair, we provided the members of the Parking Advisory Committee with copies of the traffic study that was completed as part of the GEIS and access to the full GEIS documents. We've had a couple of weeks to review them, and we plan to discuss them tonight. So we'll move on from that to the public comment period on any of the items on the agenda tonight. Mackenzie? Nothing? Okay. So we will close that and move on to item number 1, report from Chief Ritter detailing the current parking system enforcement statistics. The chief was not able to be here tonight. I do believe I got the most recent enforcement stats, but I neglected to forward that to everybody, so apologies for that. I will get that out within the next couple of days to everyone. Discussion on the DGEIS. So this will, it's a very large document, so I will simply open up the floor to any topics that anybody would like to discuss about what they read and took a look at in the GEIS.
I can open it and put it on the screen too if we need to look at it.
Yeah.
because obviously it's a 200-page document.
Which
That's
page?
big.
So that's something we can throw up
I'm
there.
pulling it up right now.
I'll make a general comment. I did think that the GIS was the way to go, I think, rather than focusing just on the DRI project, the Durkee Street project. There is cumulative impacts with the various projects, and especially when it comes to parking, because the parking is sort of all over the place, you really need to consider the project as a whole for it to make sense. So I do think that the city got good counsel to go forward with the DGIS. I'll make that comment to start. The focusing on the parking, I don't think we learned anything by reading it. I mean, it's everything that we've been discussing all the way through. But that's to be expected because we probably are more aware of the parking issue than the average citizen, who's going to pick up that document for the first time and read it. So I can say that I wasn't surprised by anything I read in the document. It will be interesting to see. I think most of the comments that have been made so far, and I don't know how many written comments you've received. I know that the time period has still got a little bit of time.
Yeah, we've got about 2 weeks left.
But I do think that one piece of I guess one comment would be, I don't think that they captured very well what the parking demand really is downtown. Utilizing Walker's counts or Ethan's counts, the city's counts. I think there was a higher demand listed in the GIS than I think there really is, based on what we've done with the counts that the cities have demonstrated to this committee. But that's really the only comments that I had.
Yeah, and based on some of the comments that we've received thus far, we have been speaking to our consultants about taking a closer look at the existing demand downtown, and we do plan to incorporate that on a more detailed level into the final GEIS to show people exactly, how many spaces we're currently using versus how many we currently have between on-street and off-street parking downtown. Any other topics anybody would like to touch on with the?
What kind of comments are you receiving? You said there's been a few.
Yeah, just based on the number of spaces that we have, the number of spaces that the, and these are discussions that the committee has had,
Sure.
that we've set aside, wanting to have a little more detail about existing demand and any excess capacity that the city may have right now. And we've had the discussion, among ourselves here at the table is, 289 spaces at the Durkee Street parking lot. Is it necessary and in the best interest of the city to fully recreate all 289 of those spaces, or does the existing demand versus the existing supply really justify the expense, not only in effort and real estate, but in the cost of the city to the taxpayers and the opportunity costs that are lost by dedicating more downtown space to parking than you actually need to have the downtown function as it should. So
that's what the public comments are? People
it's
are
some of the
writing
things
in
that
and
we've
saying
heard from
that?
people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the county planning board provided comments, and they were, I think, accurately portrayed in the Press Publican recently. But I think their comments maybe came out more critical than they would normally be viewed, principally because it's unusual for the county planning board to receive a secret document in advance of considering the application. Because when you don't have the application to go with it, a lot of the details are not in there. So some of the comments questioned, for example, show us where the 165 underground parking spaces are. Because they haven't seen the engineered design plans.
Yep.
It just said that in the GIS, that the project will provide that. Normally they have the full application so that they can actually see those detailed designs. So I think a lot of the comments made by the county planning board would be answered once those documents are produced.
I actually
have an
just got
opportunity
the
to see.
updated design for the underground parking this afternoon, so we'll certainly have that for them.
When all is said and done, how many parking spaces is Prime Development gonna have in their
I
parcel?
believe the total figure is 286.
They're gonna have?
They're gonna have 286, yeah.
Not for public use though.
Right.
Yeah, 50 of them will be designated for public use, but all in all, they'll have 286 spaces.
And one of the things to consider too with some of the parking is, it's just like we park anywhere downtown. You could go to you could go to whatever shop or commercial spaces at the, let's say the Prime Development proposal, and then still go somewhere else. It's not reserved, like you have to park there and leave, like if you drove to the Walmart or the mall. That's the advantage of downtown's walkability, is some of the people who will be going to some of this commercial or retail space is us. It's people in the community who would be parking there or visiting other locations at the same
Park where you
time.
normally park and then go and use their retail space.
Yeah.
And then walk back to wherever, you know, your business is or your home is.
Yep.
So I think that's a component. It's tough to, based on like, you know, zoning code, it doesn't really get built in and explains that. I mean, there is provisions to describe multiple uses of a site. That's just something to keep in mind too, is how it's not all just their residents parking there. It's gonna be me, it's gonna be you, it's gonna be someone down the street who could drive downtown, park there, go to, if it's a coffee shop, go to, if it's a clothes store, whatever it's gonna be. And then go to the co-op or go to Bono's or go somewhere else. That possibility is still there to not
For
just
those
be a
50 spaces.
to not just be a one-stop shop for parking.
Yep.
How much of a time limit they gonna allow by using their lot that way?
We don't know.
What's that, Joe?
Is there a time limit? Let's say I park at the Prime location, I go to one of their stores.
One of the 50 spaces, or?
Yeah,
Because you won't be a resident, or assuming you're not a resident.
right. So
Okay.
I'm not a resident. And then I leave there and I go down to Hobie's and have a little pizza, a little beer, and then I come back around Iris's, you know, make my tour. Is there a time limit that they're gonna allow in those 50 spaces? Who's gonna control them?
Well, the management of those spaces is going to be governed by a parking management agreement that the city is going to enter into with prime companies. Now, we're still going back and forth on that agreement, so nothing has been set in stone. It's something that we're currently working on.
What's the crystal ball say what kind of agreement the city wants to have with them?
Treat it the same way we treat other.
Yeah, the
off-street
general guidelines we would like to follow is to have the management structure of the publicly available spaces on the prime lot mirror to the greatest practical extent the city's management structure for the spaces that surround it.
Okay, but their spaces are gonna be governed by a kiosk, are they?
Possibly.
Because like as of now with our off-street lots, back in the August meeting, forever ago, and when we had talked about the off-street lots, potentially, you know, having either a system with kiosk and or permits to manage those for long-term parking. So as Matt said, reflecting the nearby and surrounding parking, that would be still an option, so. And there could be kiosks potentially if that's the way we go with everything else, or it could be permit parking for more than the 2 hours.
Yep.
What are you thinking, Joe?
I'm still confused because if you have permitted parking or kiosk, whatever, so maybe I go to Hobie's first. Come
So
back
you park in
around-
that lot,
Yeah, I park in that lot, the 50 spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I go to Hobie's first, whatever, and then I zip in Iris's. Then I go to one of the stores in the prime lot. Okay, so does he stamp my ticket? Does he, you know, when I leave? That's where I'm confused. How is it going to be controlled?
It's gonna be controlled by the kiosk, Joe. I mean, as
Yeah,
far
but
as, you're talking about a validated parking thing where they pay your parking fee for you, that's a whole different thing, but I
No,
think.
what I'm saying is if you've got you wind up going to one of the stores
it's gonna, I think with the way they
Do I
described
need
it,
do I need a permit on my vehicle?
you're still gonna need to
Why?
pay somehow, you're gonna need a
Why, if
permit,
I'm
or you
going
need
to
to
one
buy a
of the
ticket at a
stores,
kiosk.
why do I have, why, I don't get it, it's.
All
it's
I
considered
guess
private.
all it's saying is there's 50 of the 280 whatever spaces
Right.
are gonna be public parking, and it's gonna be controlled parking.
Mhm.
How it's controlled is still up in the air, we're still working through this kiosk thing, that's what it is. Now, if they
I'm
choose,
just,
it could be a variation where if you do go to the stores, maybe they could validate parking and comp it, but that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, it's a different system, but,
Yeah, it's a whole
and
different
again,
system.
we're gonna try and mirror it after the city's larger plan for our own parking management system.
And
It
Downtown.
should be no different than parking up in the Arnie Pavone parking, whatever we're gonna call it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't see any difference, based on the way it's been portrayed, I don't see any difference, no matter where you decide to go downtown, whether you're gonna go to one of Prime's, businesses or not.
But if I don't have a permit, I don't live in the city, okay, if I don't have a permit and I wanna go to a store at one of the prime locations,
You get it, you go to the kiosk,
You go to the
you
kiosk,
put
get
your
ticket.
license plate in,
Yeah.
Yeah,
and then what?
you paid money.
you say, I'm
I
gonna be,
wanna do business with that, and I gotta pay the park to go do business?
Yep.
exactly.
Just like you would in any other
We're
place.
screwed.
Well,
Planning is, I'm
but you
sorry.
can choose,
Come on, Joe.
But I think it's getting, everything's getting way out of hand. No one has told us what it's costing for the kiosk, what is the software support, maintenance of the kiosk, and who's paying for it? Is it coming out of general fund? Is it coming out of the 10 million? Is it coming out of special assessment? And nobody talks special assessment. We're still paying that money to the city for the parking lot. When does it stop? Is it gonna stop?
It
Probably
stops
when the
when the
parking lot
common
goes
Probably
council
when the parking,
decides.
probably
yeah.
when the part of the
My
kiosk
feeling,
show
my
up.
feeling is, as long as I pay special assessment to the city, I should not, nor should my tenants pay for parking. Somehow, some way, something's gotta be done. Cause you can't take it out of one pocket, mine, take it out of my tenants, that's not right.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that we as a committee voted on too back in August, saying assuming that we go through the kiosk
Yeah.
or permitted system.
Yeah, the intention is to have the
is
users
to
pay for
reduce
this
or
system.
eliminate the
I
SAD.
beg your pardon?
The intention is in a paid parking system to have the users pay for the upkeep of the system, not the
Yeah,
property owners.
we gotta put the money up front, the city does.
Yeah, the city does.
How
yes.
much?
That's gonna depend on the scope of the rollout, which is something that we're going to discuss.
I disagree with 2-hour parking spaces, all spaces 2 hours. You've got businesses downtown that people zip in, they place an order, and I'll tell you, 20 Below, it's one of my tenants. They're looking to move,
Mm-hmm.
all right? Somebody wants to pull in, they order a sandwich, pull in, pick it up and go. 2-hour space, there's gonna be no room. It's not gonna be feasible. It's gonna hurt their business, and there's some other places too, it's gonna hurt their business.
Well, Joe, the reorganization is going to affect various differences, or various businesses differently. And so.
I'm sorry, I still think it should go tiered parking. Put a parking garage in.
Joe, I
Right
know,
Why not? Why
Because
is it
of the
flat?
cost.
No.
just don't, you,
we
Cost.
cannot
It's too
justify the
expensive.
cost.
Have you done the study? Has the study been done?
Yes, we've done the
county's
study.
done, I can tell you this, look, why at the airport do you have to sometimes park about a half a mile from the terminal building? Cause it's too expensive to go up.
You're gonna eventually go up.
We found between $3.5 and $5.5 million to construct a parking garage that would make good the amount of parking that we need. The total amount of money that the city is likely to spend on all of the combined parking solutions is about a third of that.
It's a big difference, Joe.
It's a huge
I understand
difference.
that, but
I don't think you'd like your taxes if you had to pay for a parking garage.
you know what? Have we gone to the state? Can we beg money from the state? We haven't even tried, have we?
What do you mean? We're getting $10 million from the state.
I know, we're wasting it. We're wasting it on
I
one
disagree
project.
with
I
that.
disagree, Joe.
I'm sorry, you got a project approved down at the waterfront for a hotel conference center. It's been totally approved by the planning board. The gentleman who was gonna do it compacted the land to hold the weight of the property. The money market fell out, he couldn't get any money, but the approval's sitting right there. So why don't we spread the money out instead of put it in one hole? That's my feeling.
Because that was the project that was mandated by the state. That's what the city had requested.
So they requested the wrong thing.
Well,
You
that's
know,
water
I-
under the bridge, Joe, it really is.
No, it's never under the bridge.
Yeah.
There's a will, there's a way, but I just disagree with how it's being done.
Let me ask this.
Well-
It's my perception that there's a fair number of spaces that are available now on street.
Yeah, I mean, based on the city's own parking counts, within the special assessment district, Ethan, what are the figures, even at peak utilization, how many on-street parking spaces go unused?
On street, I mean, you can look at blah, 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 blah.
Well, the difference, the change has been since they started enforcing the parking and
Correct.
the tickets. You
Yes.
drive downtown at 7 o'clock in the morning, you can park anywhere you want on City Hall Place, or Turkey Street or Bridge Street.
Yeah, but even during
or
the day,
Market
Joe,
Street.
during the day, there's parking spaces available now.
Yeah, there are.
There's always.
And there should be,
Yeah, there should be.
if we maintain 2-hour parking, there's
Yeah.
gonna be, even after we implement this project.
You still need some, with businesses that are, you know, sandwich shops, whatever. They order a pizza at the pizza place, they wanna be able to pull up and get it, you know.
Joe, here, we'll use an example.
What?
Our shop is out in town. So say we move back and forth constantly between out in the town and in the city. And I say I wanna get lunch. I've yet to come downtown. I had a sandwich at 20 Below today. I parked right in front of 20 Below.
That's
And I
today.
was in and out in as fast as he can make the sandwich. And he knows the sandwich I eat, cause I eat the same sandwich every time I go in there. So I was in there for less than 3 minutes, okay? So I was in and out in 3 minutes, and I had a parking space right there. It couldn't ask for more. I'd never parked farther away from 20 Below than across the street and that little, on the Bridge Street Bridge itself, on that section there. So if you're asking if there's parking available at 12 o'clock noon, absolutely. The same thing with Pizza Buono. I want a slice of pizza. I pull right in there, not a problem. It has not been a problem. And this is an unscientific method. It's me wanting my lunch. That's all it is.
It varies all the time. I'm sorry.
I have yet
You
to.
know, I'm
I've yet
sorry.
to struggle to find
I
a
mean,
parking space.
Joe, we've
Kate-
done-
Kate would know
Cookie
better
cutter.
because she has a
Nothing.
business right there. Have your clients, Kate, had any problems finding parking spaces?
Sure, yeah, it happens.
But where are they wanting to park? Are they wanting to park right in front of your shop? Or are they wanting to park? Are they willing to park like around the block or across
Sure,
the street?
people are. The majority of the time since parking enforcement has begun, without parking enforcement, it's a nightmare. I lost a lot of business when parking enforcement,
If you can park all day long,
Yeah.
You're-
that's
you're-
what people will do.
you're in
Sure.
trouble.
That's
Yeah.
correct, but enforcement is everything, and we're not
Absolutely.
proposing that there's no enforcement.
Right.
Enforcement
With
is critical to
enforcement-
making, it's like having speed signs, okay, and this has been a complaint of ours at Public Works. We have signs all throughout the city, whether it's speed signs, whether it's stop signs, if there's no enforcement, it's a new point, it's an idle threat. Same thing with the parking. If it wasn't for Tori down there writing tickets, I wouldn't be able to get my sandwich in
Correct.
3 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, Joey, I have yet to find an issue.
Yeah, and Joe, we've done enough parking counts at this point. I mean, it's literally hundreds to eliminate any statistical anomalies. I mean, these are the demand figures. This is what we are using downtown, and there is a lot of capacity that is not being used at all.
I still disagree. I still
But
think
I do agree
parking
with,
garage
I do
is
agree
the
with
way to
Kate.
go.
If the enforcement goes
No
away,
one-
Yeah,
yes.
it's trouble.
no one's
There's trouble.
looking beyond the front of our nose. And
If we had unlimited money, I would agree
Yeah.
with you. Let's put
Yeah,
up a
I
parking lot.
absolutely would.
it doesn't
It would
hurt.
make my job far easier, Joe.
It doesn't
believe me.
hurt to try. And I don't know if the city has, or the county, or whoever, you know.
Well, I think the county's tried really hard by reconfiguring the parking lot.
We've applied for money for parking garages.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
difficult. That's not something that the state generally likes to give money to, is parking projects.
You know,
I'm not adverse but I just don't think it's easily enforced. If you wanted, for some of the downtown establishments, if you wanted to have 3 or 4 spaces that were 10 or 15 minutes, but I'm not sure Tory could easily
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean,
enforce that.
creating uniformity among the time limits on all of the on-street parking simplifies enforcement efforts to a considerable degree. Tory doesn't have to keep track of, well, I last visited this space 10 minutes ago, but it's a 30-minute space, and then the spot next to it was a 2-hour space, and I was there an hour ago. It's just far easier, and it's more efficient for her to do her job.
She's doing it now.
Yeah, she is doing it now, but it could be done easier and more efficiently if all of the on-street
Yeah, what
parking had the
what the
same
city's
time limit.
proposing is that all of the parking spaces that are on street
I know.
become 2 hours.
Yeah.
I understand that. I understand
We're not
that.
taking away anything from anybody. With the 10-minute spots that exist now, the
And
30-minute
if
spots.
anything, by putting the full-time enforcement back in place, it's making it better for the downtown merchants. I mean, Kate can speak to that herself. I mean, she just said that, yeah, since Tori's been enforcing it, it's been better. And then we had a period of time prior to that we didn't enforce, and I think Bob Annis was the last police, full-time police officer that enforced it. And again, he generated revenue, and there was, and you can tell when there's no enforcement,
Oh, yeah.
people are there all
Yeah.
night, all.
And I will say, there are 3 or 4 parking spaces in front of my office on Brinkerhoff that are currently 30 minutes. And for my business, that suits me much, much better.
Do you find that people generally follow that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. They're very afraid. You know, people tend to see it and they're like, oh, and you can see them sort of pull up to where it's 2 hours. Because people are running into the bank on that corner, the key bank's right there. And people are popping into my office or going to the store next door. They're quick spaces, they're in and out. For my purposes, I would prefer they stay 30 minutes. However, I do understand, you know, why they're becoming 2 hours, and it's not the end of the world by any means.
You know,
for
it's,
me.
one possible consideration is mark some 30-minute spots anyway. And even if Tori doesn't regulate them any differently than she regulates the 2 hours in terms of her pattern of enforcement,
Right.
self-enforcement, there'll be a number
really
of people
does
that
work.
will
Yeah.
adhere to that.
Yeah.
And so it might be a little bit better for those establishments that you need to get in and out.
It was probably 2008 when the city sent around just a little survey and said, we're talking about these spaces, would you prefer them be 10 minutes, 2 hours, or 30 minutes? And we said 30 minutes, and that's what they became and what they've been ever since. But
Yeah, and I think that's where the spaces that are less than 2 hours came from. But that is now an 11-year-old study, and
Sure.
it's difficult to track the businesses who were
absolutely.
present and
Yeah.
existing
Yeah, I
at
think
the
the
time of the
Christian
survey.
bookstore was next to us.
Yeah,
They're
so the needs have
gone.
evolved,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the city could do a survey like that every few years and adjust, but it's just far easier from the city's perspective and really from the public's if everybody understands that anywhere you park downtown on the street, you've got 2 hours.
I mean, I think if it's signage, it's not bad, but I mean, you won't get a huge argument from me changing it to 2 hours. It's fine.
Yeah, okay.
I'd prefer it stay 30 minutes, but
All right, any further discussion on the DGEIS? Okay, move on to a discussion of the minutes from the August PPAC meeting, and this was the meeting when we voted on all of the recommendations to send to the council. There was a pretty big meeting, so if anybody has anything that they'd like to revisit from what we agreed to in August, you can certainly bring it up now and we can chat it out, or if nobody has any comments, we can move on to the next item.
going back to the kiosks in the lots.
Yeah.
I just, again, I know none of this has been decided, but I'd like to reiterate that I think in order to make the system user-friendly, sort of piggybacking on what you just said, where it's all 2 hour parking, making it clear to people, I think the lots, I really strongly believe the lots need to be just the same as on-street, first 2 hours free. Because ideally, we really want people to be parking in the lots and freeing up the on-street parking for the quicker stops, the quick in and out, and using the parking lots for sort of the longer. But I think if we make the lots, you just drive in and you have to pay, that's really gonna deter people. And so I know I sound like a broken record. I've said this at every meeting we've discussed this. I really think it's important that in the lots, the first 2 hours are free.
How about this as an argument against that?
Okay.
I think the parking crunch that the city's gonna have with what we're looking at, what's been proposed so far, is gonna be in the lots, not on street. Because
Right.
I think
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
we have more parking available on the street for people who are staying less than all day than the number of people that are looking for all-day parking.
You mean during construction?
No, I
No,
mean.
long term. Okay, whole picture.
you know,
Got it.
A long term.
Sure.
So if you allow the first couple of hours to be free, what you're saying is that we're not gonna penalize you any more for parking in a lot than parking on the street, when we want them to park on the street. We don't want them to park in the lot, because the lots we're gonna need for the people who are employees of the businesses downtown, and the people who are residents, and it's gonna be harder for them to find parking if we allow transients to go in and encourage them to park in the parking lots, when we're gonna have more parking available on the street.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always been the intention to encourage long-term parking, to shift that parking to the off-street lots to free up as much valuable on-street space as possible. So that's where you get the free 2 hours versus you pay up front, but you have the opportunity to park for far longer than 2 hours in the off-street lots.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I just disagree.
You know, I remember when we first, when you guys first presented putting the kiosks in the lots and not put any kiosks on the streets, I thought you had it completely reversed. I thought it made more sense to put the kiosks for all of the on-street parking and not in the parking lots. And then, when you really think about it, no, I think it is, you do have it right, because we want to allow the people to park as close to the establishment that they want to visit as possible, and the people that are walking maybe a little further are the people who are staying all day long. And that you're going to encourage that by the system by putting the kiosks in the lots and making it just 2-hour parking everywhere else. You're going to encourage transient parking, and you're going to have more available parking closer to the establishments where people want to visit.
Based on the fact that you feel like there's going to be far more permit parking
Oh yeah.
than there is consumer parking.
I think these lots
That's
are going to be
scary.
filled. The parking lots are going to be close to filled.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scary prospect.
And, you know, the city, you know, this is gonna be, the city's not gonna know exactly how this is gonna work. You know, we're doing our best to try to think through as many,
Yep.
situations that could occur as possible. It may be, they may decide, you know what, we don't have quite enough parking for the long-term parkers. We're gonna have to create some of the streets that we're gonna allow long-term parking,
Yeah.
because we don't have enough in the lots. Or the city may have to decide we're gonna buy another piece of property to put a parking lot on. Maybe they won't have to do that, but they're not gonna really know that until they give this a chance to work.
And that's one of the big advantages of having an actively managed parking system. The distinction between an off-street parking space and an on-street parking space is simply a question of management. Those on-street places, if needed, can be transitioned to long-term parking, essentially the same as an off-street spot, simply by the passing of an amendment to the existing plan by the Common Council. Nothing is set in stone. So if capacity needs to be shifted from either one place to another, that's easily accomplished, which, without one, it's far more difficult to do that.
Well, you can't unring a bell though. Like say Brinkerhoff Street, they just, during this interim parking, construction zone, they decide that my block of Brinkerhoff is going to become long-term parking. It's going to impact my business so quickly that it's going to be hard to unring that bell. It's going to be hard for me to say, hey guys, my business is down 20%. They're going to go, nobody's really going to care, frankly. And so there's a point where I feel like to sort of extrapolate, then we could sort of easily change things. Well, maybe you can and maybe you can't. And at the point where you realize there's a problem, it may be far too late for businesses that are struggling to get by in this economy.
Well, I would think that if the city was presented with the choice of transitioning a portion of its on-street parking capacity to off-street parking, essentially long-term parking capacity, we would endeavor to choose spaces and stretches of road that would have a minimal amount of impact on
Sure.
nearby businesses. That was one of the the guiding principles that we were following when we put together the temporary parking plan during construction. We wanted to pick spaces to make long-term that wouldn't have any detrimental effect on businesses. It might be a little less convenient for the property owners along those streets, but we think that's,
The goal was the least
Yeah.
disruption as possible.
Yeah, I think
That
that
is the goal.
the closer you get to the downtown core are the last streets that you would want to consider allowing long-term parking, even on a temporary period of time. It's gonna be a temporary impact. I think most people are gonna expect during that period where you're constructing the parking lots and the project, there's gonna be some inconvenience. You're gonna have to walk a little further. And the people who should be walking a little further are the people who are gonna be staying all day long, not the people who are gonna be going to a business.
yeah.
I mean, I think
the
also
peop-
you think of the standpoint of the actual consumer of the spaces. If I was a tenant, I'd be much more comfortable leaving my vehicle in a parking lot, paid parking lot, more secure rather than leaving it on the street. I've lived in the city of Plattsburgh, I've done both. I've left in the parking lot, and I've also left it on the street. It's not fun leaving it on the street. And now that I'm in charge of pushing the snow around, I really.
You understand why?
I also think that, that even the employees, if I was the same deal, if I was an employee, of a, social services or any of these businesses, I would feel much more comfortable putting my car in a parking lot as opposed to leaving it on the street. The street is just that, it's for the drive-through, the 0 to 2 hour. And I know 2 hours seems like a lot, and I agree with Joe, a lot of the businesses are the in and out type of thing, like I described me going and getting my lunch and everyone else. I don't see that based on just observation, day in, day out, we drive around, we watch this, I don't see there being a problem downtown as long as we keep that 0 to 2 hour, I know you say 2 hour parking, it should be 2 hour.
Most
max.
people don't stay 2 hours.
No, they don't.
Mm.
Most people don't. I don't think your patients stay 2 hours, like you said. Some don't even stay 30 minutes, probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah, depending on your
Sure.
backlog of patients and how you're running your day and on that particular day. But yeah, as far as long-term people who want to use those parking lots, employees aren't going to want to park on the street. Now, clients for social services, that might be a different thing. Again, so.
Mm.
I don't see it. We just have to make sure that we have enough to cover the long-term parking people with the employees and the overnight parkers.
Yeah.
And for a temporary period of time, they may have to walk a little further until the parking is the project's done and permanent parking is in place.
Yep. Yeah, and the fact is, nothing substantial can be done with the Durkee Street parking lot without requiring the average person to walk an extra block or two, just simply because of the reshuffling of parking. There's no practical way to do that without asking residents, employees, customers to walk an extra block from where they park to where they work or where they're going to eat. It's simply the reality of taking a highly consolidated parking capacity and then dispersing it out through the larger community. So, any other comments on the August meeting? All right, moving on to
I have one question.
Yeah.
Has the city acted on our recommendations?
City Council has been considering the first recommendation for immediate consideration, the standardization of the 2 hour footprint. I have not had a discussion with them in a little while on that, but I can certainly follow up and see where they're at.
Because I hadn't seen anything, so I was wondering.
Yep. All right, so the last item on the agenda, discussion of the draft construction parking plan. And you've all had some time to look this over. Essentially, this is presenting two options for how to manage the city's parking capacity during the time between when groundbreaking on the Durkee development begins and when it ends. So Right now, there are 50 spaces scheduled to be set aside on the Durkee Street parking lot for public access. There are about 40 new spaces on the plans for the one-way Durkee Street reconfiguration, and there are about half a dozen spaces to be constructed on Bridge Street. Now, that leaves about 100 spaces that will not be available for public use until all of these projects have been completed. So in the interim, we have to come up with a way to accommodate the demand and those 100 spaces elsewhere downtown. So what we've tried to do with these two options is, as I said earlier, transition on a temporary basis on-street parking to short-term on-street parking to long-term on-street parking, and to do that with a minimal amount of disruption to local businesses. So we've tried to avoid at all possible the core of the downtown business community. So there are two options. They're fairly similar to each other. One of them gives a little more room to the center of Oak Street, but I will ask you guys what you think and if you have any opinions as to one plan or the other.
And it's important to know that this is by no means final, that there's a lot of alterations we could do based on our discussions. This is just initial recommendations, just
Yep.
to.
And Ethan, would you put one of the diagrams up?
Kate, this is an example where they saw Margaret Street and Brinkerhoff and Court and
Right.
as important to not allow long-term parking
Sure.
along those.
Yeah.
Because of the businesses that exist.
Exactly.
My one comment was, until, it was my perception that, and I don't know the city's rethinking this, but if the government center lot, and I don't know if anyone's seen our project is complete now.
Looks great.
We've created quite a few new spaces in our parking.
How many total is that?
We created a total, between the Oak Street lot and our government center lot, we created 68 new spaces.
Open to the public?
No. Open to the public, we've created 47 new spaces.
And how many were open to the public before? For any in that lot?
Well,
Okay.
about 40.
About 40.
Yeah.
But that 40 was originally intended for county business, not general citywide.
That's
business.
right.
Okay.
So if we're talking about publicly accessible spaces in the two county lots, where before there were 0, now we have 66.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those, before there was only about 40 spaces, now there's 66. And it was presumed that those were for county business, now they're open to anybody. I must say, we've been mildly surprised at the impact that has already had. I would say 90% of the time, between 9 and 5 o'clock, or maybe 9 to 4, that our visitors' lot was completely filled. And I think the neighboring city Court Street lot was filled. It was hard to find spaces in there. Since we've expanded that lot, there's almost always spaces available in both Court Street and our lot. So I would say, let's do a hybrid between those two. If the government center lot is gonna continue to, until the kiosks are put in, to be free for all-day parking, I don't think you're gonna need the parking along Oak Street between Court and Cornelia. Move that down on Oak.
Yeah, I mean, looking at that.
Because you're gonna need it, I think, on that end more than you're gonna need it on the.
I mean,
toward
looking at the
government center.
businesses that are on Oak there, Lamelli's, Bellasol Wellness, they were both very, very vocal about pay to park being incredibly detrimental to their business. Like, I know they're very concerned about about space turnover and having that available. So I would say option 2 at that point.
Yeah, that was something when I first was
Yeah.
looking at it, you could tell just by the parking counts completed that was the
Yeah.
parking between, whether it's the library because of Lamelli's and the other businesses.
Absolutely, the
that
Y is there
section.
also.
And so that's the
Yep.
reason, like, the first thing I like the second plan better myself as well because of that reason. The first plan, I think, helps because if people think Oak Street is all day, I think for simplicity, it's better, but we can still have the ability to enforce. So I do like option 2 better myself because it allows, because I've spoken to Lamelli's as well, early on when we started enforcement.
And option 2 would be my preference too. It's also important to note here that we're not setting aside any more than the spaces that we believe we need. This is based on observed parking demand on these stretches of road and the number of open spaces that can be counted upon to be available during different times of the day. So we set these aside so we have more or less, based on observed demand, 99 spaces that aren't currently being used, which can be transitioned to this long-term parking without having an effect
And
elsewhere.
I'd like to point out, like, the 99, that's the worst possible case. That's assuming there's no parking at either the Durkee Street project or on Durkee Street and Bridge Street at the same time. Construction schedules may allow some of that to work out. We talked about in the beginning that Durkee Street will obviously begin and take, roughly 18 months, while the street construction will take anywhere less than a year. So for half that point, we're not losing a.
That's a lot of spots. That'd be good if that could be done.
Yep.
Yeah, so obviously every effort to make the coordination between construction as easy as possible, not just specifically just for parking, but for just everyone driving downtown as a whole is gonna be a goal of the community development office.
And as those projects are refined and we have a better idea of how the construction schedules will match up, if we do not need to set aside as many of these spaces for the temporary construction parking, we can certainly scale that down.
Is there no way to make Prime at all responsible for this? I mean, they're getting huge benefits to building down here, and we're sort of just saying, oh, well, this is the way it's gonna be. Hopefully it doesn't impact downtown too badly with these 99 spaces. I mean, you're talking about adding, 47 new spaces, 60 spaces has made a huge difference. Well, if we took those away and then some, it's obviously going to have a big impact as well. Why can't Prime be more responsible for this? Why can't we be very clear that parts of this parking lot must stay available? They should be renting parking spaces, parking lots privately owned, and saying, okay, now you can park here for as long as construction goes on. Because we know construction timelines are, anyone who's had any renovations done in their house knows. The estimate's 2 months, it's gonna take 6. The estimate here, sure, it's a year, but it could easily be 2 or 3. Look at Burlington is completely locked in all kinds of development problems.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at it as really just all downside to downtown, and Prime is sort of just going, yeah, well, this is what we're gonna do. And Plattsburgh is going, okay.
It's also important to consider that the initial design plan that Prime presented to the city included far fewer parking spaces than is included on the project that's actually being submitted to the various boards.
Sure, but that's sort of, irrelevant to this actual discussion.
Well, I don't believe it is, because that inclusion of additional parking and the scaling down of their proposed development has a very real financial effect on their cost-benefit analysis, so.
They're still doing very well, while downtown may potentially really suffer.
Well,
I do think one thing that you could consider doing is you certainly can have a discussion with them on scheduling to see if a portion of that lot can remain open. The other thing is if there's any ability to have damages if they don't complete the project within a certain time frame.
Well, I think it's gonna be tied in with the funding for the actual DRI money regardless. They're gonna have to meet certain milestones, and get the project done. I agree with you, obviously what you hear on the news about what's happening over in Burlington.
It's concerning,
is a scary
hugely
thing.
concerning.
But I think with a project, and I don't know how the funding's working on that, but with the funding for this, it probably will be time sensitive, and Matt could probably speak better to that than I could, which is gonna drive Prime. Also, the longer they're not renting space or using space, they're gonna wanna push this along. They're not gonna wanna invest, they have to invest some of their own money. Don't make no mistake that.
Generally speaking, they spend less money the quicker they can finish the project.
That's correct.
Yeah.
They're gonna push this relatively quickly, and they're not gonna wanna sit around and watch it grow, like a weed or like out of the ground. They're gonna want this to jump up quick and go. They're gonna wanna rent those spaces, whatever they might be putting in there.
exactly.
But I can tell you that it's a little bit different because when the county hires a contractor to do a project for us, we have complete control of the project,
Yeah.
and we have damages clauses in there, and they work, because, you start costing them a couple $1,000s a day for every day they go over the schedule. As they get within a month of the end, they pay a lot of overtime to their employees to finish up the project before the deadline.
Yep.
I just don't know, I know this is completely different, your project here, but if you have any ability to do that, establish a reasonable time frame and then put damages in if they don't finish by then.
Yep. Now, I'm sure that the contract that Prime puts in place with the construction contractor that it brings on board to actually build the development will include those penalties for the contractor. But it is
Hard for you
something-
guys to impose it.
Well, it's
they
hard
have
for us
fine
to impose
penalties
it,
to
yeah.
Prime for not meeting the milestones would be, and that'd be something to investigate, because, yeah,
Yeah.
they can hold their subcontractors to a time schedule based on the damages, but what can we do?
Yeah.
What do we have?
That's a reasonable point.
So, Matt, is the plan to have the Prime project start before you do the Durkee Street project, or vice versa? Do the Durkee Street project first?
So currently, the Prime project is set to break ground roughly 6 months or so before groundbreaking on the Durkee Street reconfiguration. We want to have at least some time in there to allow the work that is going to take place as part of the Prime project adjacent to Durkee Street to
So
be
you don't
completed,
damage
so
the
we
work.
don't have to damage it or rip up something that was just completed. Yeah. And that's roughly the same pattern that we're looking at for Oak Street, roughly 6 months after groundbreaking or not Oak Street, on Bridge Street, those 6 spaces along the south side of the road.
Not that I'm begging for controversy, but no one has said anything about changing the Durkee Street from two-way to one-way.
Does anybody have any
I've
comments
heard,
on
I've heard a lot about that.
Dirk used to be going one way north.
going one way north? Yeah.
Yeah.
Based on the results of the traffic study that was included in the GEIS, they concluded that all of the proposed parking improvements, including the transition of Durkee to one-way, would have a negligible effect on traffic flow downtown. And that was one of the reasons that this committee had wanted to hold off on a recommendation to the council, because they wanted to see what those effects were. So based on what was included here, the effects are negligible. I think in the entirety of the core of the downtown, this parking solution results in a maximum increase of 12 or 13 seconds, and that's 12 or 13 seconds of additional wait time at a stop sign or a parking signal in the 7 intersections that were analyzed. And I don't believe that 12-second increase applied to the intersection of Bridge and Durkee and City Hall Place. I think it was up at
So it's gonna be one-way north,
one-way north, yeah.
so it's hard for me to oppose when I can't see the actual layout. The concept of it being a northbound lane only is probably fine, but obviously for snow storage and snow removal, I know I've seen some conceptual drawings of it, but from the standpoint of actually maintaining that street as a one-way and what you're putting in there for parking, which you might throw in some of that nice angle parking or something like that, that I love so much.
And Saratoga's working on the details of that, and we should have a meeting to discuss any concerns you might have about how that is to be set up so they can incorporate.
Be important for no parking to be there when you go to the plow.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Any further discussion on the construction parking plan or anything that was included in the traffic study and GEIS?
With the EIS, obviously, we're not an interested agency as a group, but if it is, you do have till the 23rd to submit any written comments
Yep.
regarding anything in the document itself.
And those can be submitted directly to the mayor's office, Kara Beth Carlin.
And after that, essentially the comments will be reviewed by the city and its consultant, and You're gonna respond, my understanding is you're gonna respond in the final environmental impact statement to all of the comments that are made. And it may result in some or no changes to the any of the plans.
Yep, that's the general idea. We receive comments, we take a look at them, determine which of them are relevant and substantive. All of those comments are answered in the final GEIS. And then once the council as lead agency accepts the FGEIS as complete, a separate finding statement is prepared and published in all the necessary places, provided to all of the involved agencies. Once the finding statement has been published, then the city can proceed with physical work on all of the constituent projects. Now, of course, the prime project is subject to multiple board approvals before anything can happen, but several of the city-sponsored projects can move forward very quickly after the completion of that process.
Such as the Arts Park.
Such as the Arts Park, yeah, that is something that we definitely plan to have ready to go as soon as the weather is suitable for it in the spring. And that should be completed within a single construction season, so by the fall, we'll have a brand-new park for the public to enjoy down there.
Now, are we gonna be able to start the Arnie Pavone project ahead?
Yep, yeah, the Arnie Pavone project also, we have a contract in place for abatement and demolition of the structure. That will begin as soon as possible after the completion of the GEIS process with construction of the new lot
See
to
you,
take
Rodney.
place shortly after. Rodney, have a good night.
What's the cost of the Arnie project?
The value of the abatement and demo contract, I believe, is $218,000. The cost to construct the new lot is as yet unknown. We have our engineering consultant putting together the bid specifications and a final site plan for what the new lot will look like.
So we don't know what the paving and all that's gonna cost?
We don't know what that's gonna cost now. Based on what the county paid to expand and reconfigure their lot, I would estimate somewhere between 125 and 175,000. But again, that's subject, of course, to the bidding process.
Give or take a few.
Give or take a few, yeah.
And then the FRB money from the Financial Restructuring Board, which will be used, the 825,000
Yeah.
will help cover those costs.
What's the money from?
The Financial Restructuring Board, so when the city consolidated some of the departments a couple years ago and started engaging some shared services, that was part of the state's mandate, so there is, as long as there's a pool of what, $4
I think
million
it's $4.5
for
million
various
total that the
projects that
city can
show,
pull from.
yeah.
Yeah.
So various projects that show that a benefit to, right, whether it's revenue generating or it's cost reduction, you apply essentially to the FRB or to the Albany, and we sent in some information regarding our parking and how we would like to use some of that FRB money for parking replacement to help
And
cover
that
that.
included estimates for what the city could expect to derive in terms of revenue from a paid parking system. And the FRB award was contingent upon the implementation of some form of a paid system. But the biggest advantage of that grant, it's $825,000, and it comes with no city match. So that is essentially free money.
Yeah, so it's just us. So as long as at the end of the day with the parking replacement, there's some form of parking management system, whether that's permits, whether that's the kiosks and the off-street lots as we talked about. It doesn't have to, they're not mandating saying it has to be this or that. It's just a matter of, we said as we move forward, the goal of the council was to implement a paid system, some form of managed parking system. And that's the requirement of that funding.
So we'll be able to cover that 100% of the cost of that new lot without any taxpayer money, is what you're saying?
More or less, yeah.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Okay, Mackenzie, anything you'd like to say? No. No? Okay, so we'll close the public comment period. Motion to adjourn? Second?
Yeah.
All in favor? Aye.
So,
All right, thank you all for coming.
can I ask you one more thing?
Yeah.
Can we get, whatever the next meeting's gonna be,
Mm-hmm.
February, March, April, whatever, can we get a ballpark cost of what all the kiosks are gonna cost us and the cost to set the system up and annual fee and all that? ballpark next meeting maybe?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, be good to see.
Sure. And yeah, I'll base it off of the recommendation we sent to the council, because that did include numbers of kiosks, but yeah, we can certainly get that. As far as, this is one thing we didn't touch on, the next meeting, do we want to do in another 3 months?
Or as soon as
See
possible.
what develops, with the council, I guess. I mean, you got some new counselors coming out in January, they may wanna move things faster, may wanna slow things down, or
Mm-hmm.
till they get up to speed, who knows?
Okay, all right, so why don't,
Well, right after the first of the year and decide.
Probably should do something right after the first of the year, and I don't know, we've had counselors sit in, maybe the new ones wanna sit in and ask some questions and get up to speed on it.
yeah, that's a good point.
You
All
know,
right, so
because
why
they're
don't,
gonna, they really should be educated as to what, I mean, I've been here 5 years now, and I'm amazed because we've had counselors come in and just blindly vote on stuff that they have no concept of what they're voting on, without asking at least questions from to me. Now, they might have asked other department heads, but some of the stuff I'm rather alarmed that they have done no research, or at least what I perceive to be research, and have,
Mhm.
and voted on things.
all right, so why don't we have our next meeting second Tuesday of January, and I will extend an invite to the new counselors to attend and ask any questions they might be
Invite
curious
some of
about.
the new guys.
Okay,
Alright.
I will do
Sounds
that.
a good idea.